Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the folks who are viewing this webinar from across the country and around the world. My name is Heidi Zetzer, and I'm serving as using deliberate practice to by the American Psychological Association, Society of Counseling Psychology, and the Supervision and Training section. Before I introduce Rod, I'd like to let you know about the people behind the scenes. We have with us Dr. Lisa Ferdinand, who's the Assistant Director for Clinical Services at the University of South Florida. And she's also the Vice President for Practice with SCP and the current Chair of Supervision and Training. And Lisa organized this webinar and will be helpful to me taking questions. Dr. Asmita Pense is a staff psychologist and training coordinator at Lafayette College Counseling Center. Asmita is the SCP webinar coordinator and the STS website manager, and Asmita will be managing our webinar technology this morning. My name is Heidi Zetzer, and I'm your moderator. I'm a teaching professor in the Department of Counseling, Clinical, and School Psychology at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where I also direct the Psychology's Training Clinic and the Positive Psychology Clinic. I have a little bit of information about the format for our webinar and about the continuing education credit that you'll be getting. So we have at least 45 minutes of content, probably more. And Rod has prepared a number of short videos. And so if we run out of time to take your questions, be sure to go onto the SCS listserv. And the way that you can get there is by joining the section for supervision and training. There's a link for that on the bottom of the flyer that was sent to you announcing this program. We may end up having a little bit of time for Q&A, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That's the best way to communicate with us. Lisa will be gathering up those questions. The chat function will not be available this morning because we're trying to keep ourselves streamlined and organized. If you want to earn 1 hour of continuing education, you must be registered and you must view the webinar via computer so we can keep track of your attendance. And you must also be present for the entire hour. SCP can provide CEs to psychologists and unfortunately not other licensed professionals at this time. However, we would like everyone to complete the evaluation that will be sent to you with a Qualtrics link a few days after the webinar. So please watch your email and read your email so that you can fill out the evaluation. If you want CEs, you're going to need to do the evaluation and an additional very short demographics survey. And then once that's completed, the certificate will be sent to you within a couple of weeks after the webinar. If you have questions about CEs, you can direct them to Lisa Ferdinand at lferdinand@usf.edu. So that's taking care of the business of the webinar, and now I'm going to introduce our wonderful speaker. It is my distinct honor to introduce Dr. Rodney Goodyear, who is the co-author of Fundamentals of Clinical Supervision. The 6th edition was published in 2019, and I'm proud to say I've read the 3rd through 6th edition cover to cover. Wow. And Rod is also the co-author of a wonderful book called The Cycle of Excellence, Using Deliberate Practice to Improve Supervision and Training, which was published in 2017. And as many of you probably already know, he's the author of many chapters and articles on supervision. Rod directed an APA accredited counseling psychology doctoral program at University of Southern California for 2 decades, and he's currently emeritus from that program. And he also served on the American Psychological Association's Commission on Accreditation. Dr. Goodyear is the past president of the Society for the Advancement of Psychotherapy, that's APA's Division 29, and served on the Supervision Guidelines Task Force of the Board of Educational Affairs for APA. He's a professor at the University of Redlands, and he's director of the Center for Advanced Professional Education. Rod was the recipient of the 2015 award for APA's Distinguished Career Contributions to Education and Training. and his work is increasingly international, and he's currently working on an ongoing project, supervision training project in China. I feel certain that some of Rod's colleagues in China are probably watching us now. It is 6 p.m. on Sunday over there. So without further ado, I would like to invite Rod to share with us this wonderful presentation. And I hope you all will stick with us throughout the hour and send some questions that we may be able to get to a few of at the end. Rod?
Thanks, Ivy. Thanks so much. So I'm going to move quickly then to the PowerPoint presentation. I've got a lot to cover today. So it's Ivy to limit the amount of interaction with chat and whatnot, and I hope that this conversation simulates enough interest that we can have ongoing chat, for example, on our section listserv afterward. But what I'd like to accomplish today is actually pretty ambitious in an hour. I want to talk a little about how we got into this kind of work. I want to talk about what deliberate practice is, and there's quite a few people signed up for the webinar. What we don't know, because we didn't have the list, is who signed up. So I'm assuming quite an array of people in terms of their levels of familiarity with deliberate practice. So we're going to do some basic definitional stuff with that, and we're going to. I've got some videos then to illustrate some various approaches to it. So I think one of the questions then is, once we've defined it, is what does it look like, and what do you deliberately practice? So I'm going to just plunge in and give a quick history of how I got to where I am. And I want to say that I've been really fortunate to have connected with some really bright, talented, and creative people who are doing this work. I'm kind of I feel like my role has been in some respects an interpreter of it. Our work started with an article that it was originally Terry Tracy's idea, and a group of us then worked up an article for the American Psychologist, in which we took the provocative stance that it's really difficult, maybe almost impossible, to become a true expert in psychotherapy. And of course, that stimulated a lot of really interesting discussion, and you can see some follow-up articles and so on that. And so on the one hand, that was provocative. On the other hand, we were left then with what to do next. But let me talk a little about kind of the line of reasoning that got us to this. So this is a graph that I've created for myself on my own, but it's based on data and approximate data in any case. And as you see the blue line there, it suggests how people's trajectory in becoming effective with their clients. And I should say that our position has always been that to become a true expert, you need to be your clients need to be improving at a rate that exceeds that of the norm, and that there's continuous development process. And another point I want to make is these are effect sizes on the left side of the screen, and psychotherapy has very robust effect sizes. So the good news is that across multiple meta-analyses, the approximate average effect size is about 0.8, which it exceeds most medical interventions. So psychotherapy is very effective. And so that's the good news. The stuff that's challenging to us and what started us down this path is that, as you can see from the blue line, people tend to plateau fairly quickly. It doesn't take too long before people reach a plateau that is the average psychotherapist and tend not to change. So that Daryl Chow has called this the okay plateau, and it's okay in the sense that yes, we do obtain as an average pretty effective outcomes. The orange line suggests our felt competence, and so whereas people on average tend not to change in their effectiveness, they tend to believe they do, which can cause some challenges in terms of persistence and wanting to continue self-development and so on. So these are data from Goldberg et al. The lines, each line indicates one therapist, and you can see it's across 18 years, 170 therapists, and so on. These lines regress the client outcomes by year, and you can see trends, so that the lines in which where the lines are going up, the therapist is getting more effective across time. Where they're going down, the therapist is getting less effective across time. And I should point out again that we're at well, I'll just leave it at that. So what was interesting in their study was that actually there was a mild trend toward the average therapist getting less effective across time. It was very mild, but still, I think it really does underscore the challenge we have in the field, is kind of the what next. So one thing that heads us down this path of deliberate practice then is a study that Xiao et al. Did, or published in 2015. They grouped therapists in terms of performance, in terms of client quartiles. They found that the top quartile of therapists invested about twice as much time on deliberate practice activities as therapists in the second quartile, and about 4 times as much as those in the bottom quartile. So that's the optimistic note, and that's really what started us down this path. So the good news is that the deliberate practice seems to be an avenue then that can increase therapist outcome. And so here's another study, also Goldberg. This is a study of the Calgary Counseling Center, and what they found there is that therapists did improve across time. But they improved. It's a longer story, and there's a chapter in our talk about how that came about. But what got them most immediately to this point is that they engaged in routine outcome monitoring, so that every client was assessed in terms of progress after every session. They tracked progress. They had regular video conferencing with the consultant, who then would review cases that were deteriorating and so on, and try to identify what might be going on, what the therapist could do different, and so on. So it really became an opportunity to be reflective and try different things. So it moved toward that deliberate practice mode. And so there's some good news there. And then all that came together for me then. I had just a wonderful collaboration with Tony Rumanier, Scott Miller, and Bruce Wampold. And we did this edited book, Cycle of Excellence, in which it was like being in a very high-level graduate seminar. Talk through just what the heck this was, what it should look like, and so on. So then again, the trajectory was from the realization that most therapists tend not to improve, but that there's some good news and with respect to deliberate practice. And so then the pursuit then is at the individual therapist level. How do we improve each individual therapist using deliberate practice? So, and I know I'm rushing because I've got so much to cover today, so I apologize for my rushed tone here. So what is deliberate practice? So here's from Erickson and Poole. The deliberate practice mindset is that anyone can improve, but it requires the right approach. If you're not improving, it's not because you lack innate ability or talent, it's because you're not. So, and that is one of Erickson's ongoing stances, which is that for most things, even though we tend to kind of revert to thinking in terms of talent, it's less talent and it's much more about practice and doing it the right way. So, and Erickson was the one who came up with the concept of deliberate practice. And that evolved from their study of music students at the Berlin University of the Arts. And you can see the graphs there on the, well, the graph. And so you can see that the very best therapists, the very best violinists in this case, were at the top. You can see it indicated here. But what these on the left side of the graph are, or the figure, are the hours of deliberate practice these folks had put in. So what they found was that the one thing that discriminated the groups was the total number of hours that the students had devoted to solitary practice. And that is where they sat by themselves and practiced over and over again. That's the deliberate practice. So to become an excellent violinist requires several thousand hours of practice. We found no shortcut notes and no prodigies who reached an expert level with relatively little practice. So that was the realization from the study, that it really was about the amount of practice. And so Malcolm Gladwell later wrote a book, Outliers, which I'm sure many of you have read. He popularized Erickson's work and talked about the so-called 10,000 hour rule, which is drawn from this graph. And it oversimplifies. It does make the point that it takes an awful lot of practice, but Erickson has since written an article pointing out that it's not exactly 10,000 hours, it's a lot of hours. And that it's not just doing the same thing over and over again. It really is very specific to deliberate practice, which Gladwell, I think, confused a little bit in his book. So just some examples of illustrate how true expertise comes about through this much practice. So I've got a great quote here. World-renowned cellist Pablo Casals continued to practice 5 to 6 hours a day well into his 80s because he wants, I think I'm making progress. And Michael Jordan shot at least 500 free throws every day of his basketball career. So really world-class athletes and world-class musicians put in an incredible amount of time in deliberate practice. And it's really important to make the distinction between naive practice and deliberate practice. If you remember early on, I showed you the data from the Goldberg study showing that the average therapist tends not to get better with experience. And it's not so much time in the seat doing what you ordinarily do, it's deliberate practice, which is a little bit different, quite a bit different than that in many ways. And we'll define it and talk about that in a little bit. But the advantage is with deliberate practice is that you can really control the learning opportunities. And so if you're a psychotherapist and you have a client who evokes a particularly troublesome reaction in you, and you respond in a clumsy way, and you think to yourself, my God, I'm not going to do that again. I can't, yeah. But then you don't have another opportunity. It could be a very long time before another client responds in that same way, so you get a chance to practice a different response. So that's one of the challenges in just continuing practice as usual, as opposed to deliberate practice. And to illustrate how that might look, here's one of Erickson's favorite examples. So say you're playing doubles in tennis, and you just missed a backhand volley. The game will just keep going. And if the same situation emerges a couple hours later, you're not likely to do much better. Now try a thought experiment, practicing with a coach. The coach allows you to stand by the net ready to do your backhand volley, and it makes it increasingly more difficult. Eventually, he forces you to run up to the net to do it and embed it in regular rallying. You can improve your performance more in those 1 or 2 hours with the coach than 5 to 10 years of regular practice with your friends. So I think the analogy to psychotherapy is pretty direct here. So again, if we have a particularly problematic event with a client and we vow we're going to do better and we're going to practice and improve it, if we just wait for that to emerge in our day-to-day practice, we could wait a very long time and maybe not be prepared when it does happen, as opposed to deliberate practice, which would involve isolating that particular event and then creating exercises to allow you to practice to do it better. So one point I want to make is that this started out, I think, with Erickson. It certainly started out with the study of expertise, and those of us who got interested in therapy and the most recent writings were thinking in those terms as well. It really applies to all of us in learning any skills. So it certainly, experts put an incredible number of hours in deliberate practice, but deliberate practice can help all of us at any level. And that's what I want to talk about here in a little bit in terms of deliberate practice being available to train more beginning folks and also more advanced folks. The other thing is, to some extent, it's not entirely new. I've been teaching a course for decades, basic skills course, in which I isolate specific skills, micro skills, kind of concepts, not really micro skills, but would break it into concepts like reflective listening. So get students in triads, and they would practice with each other, and with, I'd introduce what the concept is, give them a method of evaluating how good it was, and roam around and give feedback. So in a sense, that was deliberate practice. And I think many of us have been doing things like that for some years. So many of us have been doing some version of deliberate practice. I think what's new is we now have a concept for it that allows us to refine that and make it more effective. So again, while some of us have been doing it for a long time, many of us have, I think that the new understandings of it are going to help us do it so much better. So I want to talk about what deliberate practice is, and I'm going to just, rather than reading to you. So the first of these has to do with isolating specific skills to improve. So I gave the analogy earlier of playing tennis, in particular, that talked about practicing a particular way of swinging or using the racket. It's isolating a specific skill, and that's really what this is about. So John Wooden, famous UCLA basketball coach, it really provides a nice lesson, I think, for some of us about, for example, breaking training into discrete units and then putting it back into a whole. So I've got a quote here: "I tried to teach according to the whole part. I showed them the whole thing to begin with, then I'm going to break it down into parts and work on the individual parts like dribbling, passing, and so on, and then eventually bring them back together." And that's really what this is about, so that you isolate a specific skill or task and really practice it. It also requires that we have a supervisor or consultant. So again, I've got an Erickson quote. You want to climb a mountain and you're not sure how high you want to go. That peak looks awfully a long way off, but you know you want to get higher than your current. Simply take off on whichever path looks promising and hope for the best, but you're probably not going to get very far. Or you could rely on a guide that has been to the peak and knows the best way there. That will guarantee that no matter how high you decide to climb, you're doing it in the most efficient and effective way. So I think that really captures the essence of it. And we're, as therapists, already familiar with the concept of supervision, and the single most important factor in our professional development. So we recognize that, and it continues to be important in deliberate practice. And I guess I also want to add that in this model, the assumption would be, if you want to, you can learn your basic skills and develop competencies that'll get you to the level of licensure and so on, at which point most of us then stop formal supervision, although there's some data suggesting that a good proportion of us continue to get at least peer supervision and so on. In this model, it would be even more than that you continue with a consultant who would work with you to to really help you continue to develop beyond basic competence.
Rod, can I interrupt you a moment?
Yes, please.
We're having some trouble with the audio going in and out for you.
Okay.
And the only thought is to reduce the load on the transmission. And so maybe until you get the video to the videos, it might be okay to turn the sound off on the display. I don't know if that will help or not.
All right. Actually, let's see. And I can turn off, I'll turn off my video. That'll help some.
Okay. Yeah, because the audio is cutting out and I'm sure everybody wants to hear. Thanks.
Of course. Thank you. So feedback, and this is something we're all familiar with. I don't need to spend a lot of time on it, except that to emphasize just how central it is to deliberate practice. So it's about practicing a skill, but getting good feedback. So feedback answers the how am I doing question, but also where am I going? So feedback really has to do with addressing discrepancies between what the person's doing and what the ideal would be in that case. And feedback in psychotherapy training really, the quality of it depends on the quality of information you have going on. And I don't need to go off on too much of a tangent here, except with respect to ordinary supervision's done, except to comment that the modal version of supervision out in the field is supervisee self. And there's so many limitations to that that really keep us from moving into deliberate practice mode in our day-to-day supervision. Really good feedback requires things like directly observing sessions, which is really becoming a standard of practice, reviewing recordings, getting client feedback. Routine outcome monitoring is also becoming a standard of practice and provides important information. So, and I'll talk more about that later. You can use simulations and role plays to observe how the trainee or the therapist is doing. So so good feedback requires good information about what the person's actually doing in practice. Another part of the definition of deliberate practice is successive refinement and repetition. And so that the APA guidelines on accreditation talk about training is sequential and graded in complexity. So we as a field have recognized this for a very long time. You start basic and you start, and that it's really spoken to here. So in this case, the supervisor or consultant helps the supervisee isolate a skill, but then to specify tasks that become increasingly difficult for the supervisee and while you're offering support and encouragement. An important part of deliberate practice is that the task that the person is performing should stretch them a little bit. So it shouldn't be something that they've already mastered and is so easy that you're not learn much by doing it again. On the other hand, it shouldn't be so hard that it overwhelms. So I'm going to talk a little bit practice, and it's a series of manuals and has this as one of the rating scales that the trainees fill out after each exercise. So it involves getting continuous feedback from the trainee about how difficult things are. And by the way, this is from the book that's in press from it illustrates the use of hand signals for trainees. So to give continuous feedback on how difficult the task is. So as the supervisee or trainee in this case is practicing, uses the hand signal. If the hand is low, then the task is too easy. On the other hand, too hard would be raised high, which is kind of an interesting innovation, I think, in terms of the role plays many of us use in our day-to-day training of trainees. And You know, I'm just so aware of time all of a sudden. I want to move to quickly ahead, so I'm going to move through. Another piece of it that's essential is,
Rod, I'm back again.
yeah,
We're still having a little bit of trouble with the audio. It's so interesting. You'll
yeah.
get a couple of sentences from you and then lose one and then get them back again. Any
Huh.
ideas on how to streamline things?
I do not. I'm in my office. I'm on a wireless system, but I'm on the university system, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, typically it works, so I'm a little bit
Yeah.
puzzled. Okay,
Um,
okay,
uh,
thank you. Yeah.
so I will hope that it gets better.
Okay.
So the final thing, and this is really important, is that it involves deliberate practice involves solo practice outside of performance. And that is, and again, back to the theme that it's not just doing the same thing over and over again. So it's not just sitting in your office, seeing your clients on an hourly basis across time, doing the same thing. It involves, first of all, isolating specific skills, but also setting aside time to practice separately from what you're ordinarily doing. And I'll talk more about that as we go along today and how that might look. Um, and uh, and again, to emphasize that it's not just day-to-day practice. I think, you know, in our culture, we have there's a common saying, practice makes perfect. And that's really not true. It's more about practice makes permanent. So that which you're practicing becomes automatized and very permanently ingrained. And if we're practicing the wrong things or not as good as they might, or if our responses aren't as good as they might be, it becomes a permanent part of our repertoire as opposed to practice. And practicing very specifically with the guidance of a supervisor or consultant to really work on perfecting specific skills. So again, I apologize. I know I'm talking very fast. I'm covering a lot of ground. I want to talk about what to practice deliberately and how. And so so we can practice competencies that are identified by consensus in the field. We can practice competencies that are research, practice model-specific competencies, or we can develop individualized training goals, which is where we started this whole concern about expertise in psychotherapy. So one version of looking to research would be common factors. So this is from Wampold and Emmel. These are effect sizes, and you can see that alliance skills, empathy, consensus, and collaboration. These are all things that research shows have really significant effects on our work. So if we follow those data, that suggests that, you know, some basic kinds of skills to be worked on in deliberate practice. Chow and Miller have distilled that literature and developed their own taxonomy of deliberate practice, which I summarized here. So they have things like structure. How do you start a first session? How do you elicit detailed nuance feedback? Hope and expectancy. How do you conduct an induction into psychotherapy and so on? They've got alliances. The alliance is so central. They've got client factors, client therapists use themselves, therapists outside. So they've developed their own taxonomy, which you all can obtain if you go to Scott Miller's website. And if you haven't already done that, you should do that. In any case, register for the ORS and scales, and which are free to use as an individual therapist. And in that package, they've embedded this taxonomy of deliberate practice exercises. So I would certainly commend that to you. Another set of pan-theoretical competencies would be Tim Anderson's work, which maybe you're familiar with, and incredibly predictive of psychotherapy outcomes. And And Bruce Wampold has worked to develop that, and here's where I move into a video, which I hope plays well. They've developed a platform called TheraView, which is based largely on the Tim Anderson skills, and it really illustrates one use of deliberate practice for really basic skills. I need to say that I was involved with TheraView early on. I'm not
The idea is to be able to repeat the practice over and over again. And as we know from deliberate practice, if you have a coach or a supervisor or an instructor to also give you feedback, that's helpful. Okay, this is theraview.com, and it's a platform for practicing therapy skill. The idea is you get to practice a skill multiple times. And then when you're satisfied with your response, you can submit it to the instructor or to a set of peers to get feedback. You can see various skills to practice: empathy, affective perception, alliance repair, attribution of progress, psychoeducation, and explanation. Skills that the student can practice, and the various practice cases vary on the difficulty. Here's the various practice cases in alliance repair, and you can see here there's 4 different cases. I'm going to watch the video as the participant or the student or the therapist, and then I'm going to record a response. So I'm going to start here, and here's the practice case. Oh, and by the way, Rod, on the right are various components just to remind us, well, what makes a good alliance repair response? The instructor would teach the skill and then have the students practice. And again, they can practice on their own because, you know, the first time you do this, it doesn't sound so good. So you do it over till it's better. And then you can submit it to the instructor for feedback, or you can submit it to some of your peers. Marcy is an 18-year-old high school student who presents with severe depression. She has conflict, both of her parents, and expresses attachment difficulties. Here the therapist is inquiring about her close relationships with other students at her school.
You know, I don't really know if I'm really ready to kind of share that with you. I don't even really know you. We really just met, and I don't really think that's something I'm comfortable or ready to talk to you about.
Marcy, I really understand this. I mean, we did just meet, and I'm asking you some pretty personal questions. I really value that you're able to tell me about your uncomfortableness with this. This is going to be really important in therapy, that you do just what you did, and that is to be honest with me about your comfort in what we're doing. As we go on, it will be important to delve into some pretty personal material as part of therapy, but let's take it one step at a time. So there's my response to Marcy. If I were to do it again, Rod, I think I could do better. It was a little long-winded. I don't like to go quite that long. I made 2 or 3 points. I could be more succinct. But I did let her know that I appreciated the fact that she was honest with me. And that was the central thing I wanted to say to her. You know, when people come to therapy, they really are uncertain about what you do here. And we do ask personal questions. So Marcy's response is not out of the ordinary. But we don't like to be challenged, right? I don't want to answer your question. So then I get to rate myself, Rod. Was the response non-defensive? I think I did a pretty good job there. And the idea is
So I'm going to move along simply because of time. So, but you can see that that's a platform where there's a series of options. These are vignettes that have been video recorded, and that the trainee or therapist who wants to improve his or her skills can tune in, watch the video, offer a response, score it him or herself, and then pass it on and keep redoing it until they're comfortable with it, and then pass it on to a coach or supervisor who can then give additional feedback. I want to talk quickly about, well, let me back up. So I talked about what you can deliberately practice. So we can practice basic skills that are research informed. I think we can also practice basic skills that are associated with particular theories or approaches. And so I'm working with Tony Rumanier and Alex Boz on a series with APA Press that basically a series of manuals that address particular models. So the first in the series, and this is in press, is a book on deliberate practice and emotion-focused therapy. So it has, and each book has approximately a dozen core skills unique to that particular model. And the way they're developed, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, and then I'm going to go back to sharing, share manuscript of the book. So this is from the emotion-focused therapy book. You can see, first exercise, empathic understanding. The way it's structured is in triads, and it's very scripted, so that the skill is defined, and there's some examples given and some structure to it. But then there's the person playing the client is given some scripts. So beginning level statements. I just can't stop thinking about my mother who died last year. And then the person would practice an empathic response, get feedback from the person who is playing the client, and then refine it and keep refining it until it's feeling like you've really met criterion. And you can see there are different categories. Optimistic, I like to feel better about myself, and I think I'm finally ready to work on some important issues of therapy. How do you respond empathically to that? Then there are intermediate level client statements, and then more advanced statements. So again, it's that principle to keep stretching the person so that they're always just outside their range of comfort. So once they've mastered it, you push them a little harder. So the analogy would be if you're in a weightlifting program at your gym, you're going to gradually increase the weights. You wouldn't want to do it so much that you overwhelm yourself, but you want to keep stretching your capabilities. So get back to the video, the presentation. And then individualized training. So again, I'm racing through this, I feel, and I had some other videos here I was going to show, but I wanted to show how you can standardize it. So much of what I've been talking about is particular sets of skills, whether they're skills that all therapists should have with respect to empathy, alliance repair, and so on. They specific. But then you can deliberate practice can be much more focused on the individual therapist and his or her needs. So Scott Miller and colleagues have a series of feedback-informed books. They've got a feedback-informed supervision book. Theirs is grounded in client feedback. So they talk about routine out monitoring, identifying particular clients that are deteriorating, watching the videos to identify what of the sessions, identify what seems to be going on, what you could be doing as a therapist, and practicing those. So that becomes feedback informed supervision. And also, I just want to take 1 minute on this, and maybe then I'll stop. So this is, I want to talk.
Deliberate practice focused supervision aimed at kind of helping you acquire skills that are you're paying careful attention.
I'll just spend a couple of minutes on this. This was Tony consulting with one of my trainees here at the University of Redlands, who's having difficulty with one of her clients, and we decided to be a good opportunity to work with Tony. And what I wanted to show you is how Tony chose to work with her at an individual level. So whereas we've been talking about general skills that would be broadly applied, I think as supervisors, we also are going to be curious about how we can individualize deliberate practice activities. So what Tony did in this case is to watch the video with the supervisee, with their client, and then came up with some scripts, and I'll just play a couple of minutes of it, that she agreed would be good things to say to the client. And then Tony had her play the session and stop every 30 seconds or so and practice saying that phrase over and over again. So
to her, but she's trying to push down feelings, then it can be your will driving the bus, so to speak, rather than her. And she might almost get the idea that, like, oh, my therapist wants me to have strong feelings, so maybe I do something for the therapist, and it's not clear if it's for her.
Yeah, I don't think she's concerned about pleasing me.
Well, so which of these skills sounds valuable? Do you want to work with the minimizing? Do you want to work with the minimizing? Okay.
I think that would be really helpful. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Do you have a pen or something you can write stuff down?
I do.
Okay. So we're going to think up some lines for you to use with her, and we're going to kind of do this together, but it's important that it's in your voice, that it makes sense for you. So let's see, something to the effect of, and minimize, why don't we try a different word? Why don't we try distance?
Okay.
Because it just might, just minimize sometimes can, something to the effect of, Joan, is there an urge to distance from your painful feelings? How could you say that in your words?
I would probably say, like, do you feel the need to distance yourself from your feelings?
Great. Can you write that down?
Okay.
And then it's something to the effect of, it's not my right to...
So I wanted to just show you that quickly to illustrate again that you can individualize the training. So in this case, these were things she was struggling with in terms of being able to deliver that message to the clients. So, and she was a beginning student. So Tony had her come up with some script, if you will, of how she might respond to the client, and then again stop the tape periodically and just practice saying those words, so that it would become much easier for her when she was actually with the client and kind of in the the press of the moment and having all the other kinds of affective responses to clients, that this would become much more easy. And I'm aware of time, so I'm going to end with one more thing, which is I think there's a common notion that deliberate practice is only at the technical skills level, and Tony in particular, and I've got a URL at the top, has spent a lot of energy making the case that it's also about, we can also practice our affective responses, our what he calls our inner capacity, so that he's developed a number of vignettes. And you go to this website, you can see these vignettes, you can try them out yourself, where what Tony would have you do is watch the video and just stay attuned to what feelings is this eliciting, what kind of bodily reactions are you having, what thoughts are you having, and just play it over and over again as you increase. So it's kind of almost like a mindfulness state. And I think in that sense, then Tony's come upon a way, I think, to help us work with issues like countertransference. So you could take, if you had a client who was eliciting particular feelings, you could isolate segments on a video. And again, the notion is deliberate practice is separate from your ordinary therapy. So you find time separate from your usual workday to watch that video and really start becoming attuned to what that client's eliciting in you. So I think, that's my final thought, and I'll stop, is that it's not just about technical skills, it's also, I think, deliberate practice really allows us to address other issues like countertransference and reactivity. So I will stop.
Thank you, Rod.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I felt like I really rushed. I hope it was moderately coherent. Did you think, is there anything else I should be covering, do you think?
Let me just review the steps of deliberate practice, and then we have a couple of questions that are really excellent, and I think it'll allow you to provide kind of a recap or a summary of the important elements.
Okay.
You want to reveal yourself over there so we could see you? Do you want to turn on your video?
Oh, me. Oh, me. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Me. Sure.
Okay, so I just want to say that, you know, this is a wonderful approach to training. I know those of us who engage in supervision and training are so committed to ensuring that our students, our supervisees, develop their fundamental skills and then also continue to grow beyond the training that they receive in graduate school. So I like that this model can apply to advanced practicum students, interns, postdocs, and even those of us who are a little bit more seasoned or senior. Another thing I want to highlight was neat to see the deliberate practice approach to multicultural counseling, and also I heard you reference countertransference. So it's not just specific helping skills or micro skills, but this can be applied to some of those more complex concepts.
So yes, let me interrupt there and say.
Yes, go ahead, comment.
Again, I just rushed through and had so much more to say. So the book series we're doing with APA, we've got our first book, this is already in press. I'm in the executive editor series, I'm rather than the author, but our first book is Emotion Focused Therapy. We've got a CBT one is coming up next. Then we're working on a psychodynamic one, but we've also got one that will focus on, let me get back, on multicultural skills. And
may I ask to just ask this question then? We can just leave that and let folks know that it's coming?
Sure.
Okay? Yeah.
Well,
so we had two really excellent questions, one in the domain of application and one related to research. So I'd like to pose those before we wrap up.
Okay.
This question is, what do you recommend for those who want to implement deliberate practice and supervision, but the demands of the day-to-day job limits or prevents time for reviewing session recordings? And what would be the next best thing? And this comes from Allison. Great question. I know a lot of people have this question on their mind.
I think this, and I've done a few workshops on the topic, this inevitably comes up, and I think that's the big challenge. I think, first of all, I think the standard of practice now really is that you would be reviewing at least some of the supervisee's recordings or direct observations. I hope that it's being worked in somehow. And I think the challenge would be, and it's easy for me to say is, as a backseat driver here, the challenge would be to set aside a little bit of time in sessions to really focus on specific skills and really, isolate them and come up with a plan for improvement. And I know this is really important to monitor what's going on, particularly go through the caseload, check in, and so on. So a lot of that can really suck up much of your supervision hour. But I think and that's the challenge, and that's what's going to be one of the difficulties in making this a routine part of supervision. But is finding that just really committing to at least some part of the session to isolating specific skills and giving homework. It involves homework assignments to the trainee to go do something different than what they would ordinarily. Our usual supervision is, well, go try this in your next session. This would be more about here's a specific exercise, go watch that video again and do X, Y, and Z. But that would be, again, I understand I'm backseat driving and it's easier said than done perhaps, but I think that's the way to make it work.
Well, as a supervisor myself, I would be happy to say Rod Goodyear recommends this. And so that will give me a lot more authority as the supervisor in that case. We do have a question about research, and that is there any research that connects the deliberate practice activity domains with the current competency-based evaluations for training and supervision?
So the exciting part, I think there are a lot of exciting parts about deliberate practice. One is that the field it's also a challenge. There really is not much research. So, there's the Chow study. There's a recent one with Clara Hill and Tony Rumanier and others. It was focusing on the training of one particular skill. I think it was genuineness. So there's a few limited studies, but I think the field is wide open on this. And I think what I really wanted to convey here is the part of the excitement is we have different people each trying out different things. So you got Bruce Wampold trying out TheraView and big things. We've got this APA series where we've got a particular model that Tony's really driving. Scott Miller and Daryl Chow are doing their thing. So it's really exciting to watch people trying to develop the I'd say is an educational technology. And as we do that, then the research really needs to start matching it and validating that it is working.
Great, thank you. We're moving to close here, and to wrap things up, I want to remind our participants of the 5 steps of deliberate practice. So first, isolating specific skills to improve, guidance from a supervisor or consultant, feedback, immediate and ongoing, and the use of video is particularly helpful there, successive refinement and repetition, and solo practice outside of performance. And you've really covered all of those quite well. We want to finally bring this to a close. We have just a couple of minutes left. Any final remarks, Rod, before I wrap things up?
No, only to thank you for the opportunity to do this. Thank you and the section leadership. I'm glad to see the response to this. We had quite a few people sign up for this webinar, which indicates the level of excitement I think this is creating. And I hope, and again, I apologize for, I know I stumbled over my words and kind of rushed through this to try to cover an awful lot of ground and really didn't get to as much as I'd like. So I hope that we can have some follow-up discussion on the section listserv. I think I would be really gratified if this started a conversation that we could continue then on our and other meetings.
That sounds great, and thanks for that reminder. So I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation. And all of this has been recorded. This will be posted on the SCP YouTube page, so we'll make that available to people. I want to thank Lisa Ferdinand and also Asmita Pense for their support over this program. If you're interested in continuing the discussion, you should join the section of Supervision and Training and get on the STS list. There's a link to that on the flyer that was sent to you announcing this program, so that's the best way to engage in that way, and hopefully we'll continue the dialogue. There were a lot of great questions we weren't able to get to. Just a heads up, on March 5th at 9 a.m. Pacific time, we're going to have another webinar. The presenters are Drs. Angela Kumel and Rebecca Wilbur, and they're doing a webinar, An Introduction to Supervising Students with Disabilities. So thank you everyone today for your patience with our technology challenges. We got some great suggestions from our audience, so we'll be sure and implement those. And please join us for continued discussion. If you're at APA, come to the section for Supervision and Training meetings, and they're open to any APA member. So Rod, thank you again, and I wish everyone a really wonderful Monday or Sunday if you're in China, okay?
Okay. Thanks.
Goodbye, everyone.